Confirmed coronavirus cases in Nigeria now 4,399 as 248 new cases are recorded.
"160 Nigerian returnees from New York arrive Abuja."
Bauchi state government refutes claims of deaths from coronavirus in Azare area.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss COVID-19 and underlying ailments.
The spike in the number of COVID-19 cases in the country has direct bearing with the spate of community transmission in the country.
Well, Kieran, although the Federal Ministry of Health and the Nigeria Center for Disease Control will also attribute the spike in cases to increased testing for the coronavirus, the trend of community transmission of the disease in the country is certainly not in doubt.
Yes, and the growing number of cases comes with corresponding challenges of bed spaces, as indicated by the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 and secretary to the government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, who indicated last Friday that reports reaching the PTF from the states suggests that the treatment centers are running out of bed spaces.
Well, I recall that the Presidential Task Force had at some point asked state governments to prepare some 300 bed spaces for COVID-19 patients. But if at present Lagos is moving on close to 2,000 cases and Kano has more than 500 already, then there is need to scale up the capacity of isolation and treatment centers in the states.
That's right, indeed, Kingsley. And since we are clearly into community transmission stage, the Federal Ministry of Health and the NCDC have consistently appealed to families to protect their elderly ones and vulnerable people by not exposing them to social settings where they can easily contract the deadly virus.
Now, this is because medical experts have identified those with underlying medical conditions such as diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure, and asthma as being highly susceptible to contracting the coronavirus.
And the death toll in Nigeria has been largely attributed to the health authorities, by the health authorities rather, to the existence of such underlying ailments which are prevalent in older persons above 65 years. But this is not to say that a young person managing chronic coronavirus illness cannot succumb to the virus.
Well, precisely, Kyria. Now, the symptoms of COVID-19, which include itching of the throat, persistent dry cough, difficulty in breathing, vary from person to person. But that such symptoms are said to be more severe amongst persons who have underlying medical conditions. But one worry is that some of the older persons with these underlying medical conditions are the ones who are farming or trading in the markets in rural areas at this stage of community transmission. So, how do you convince such persons to stay at home?
Many of them we hear also being refused treatment at the hospitals because of the raging pandemic, and they are forced to cope with such underlying ailments which could deteriorate and eventually lead to death. This is certainly not the best of times for the country's health sector and that of many countries of the world.
Certainly, Kirian, I mean, there's no doubt about that, the COVID-19 pandemic has reordered our world as we used to know it, and going forward, many things are likely to change. But still, one of the questions to ask is, what should persons who have underlying medical conditions do to protect themselves from contracting COVID-19? Or better still, how they can manage their conditions in the midst of the pandemic? And is there any link between the so-called mysterious or strange deaths being recorded in some states in the country and such underlying ailments?
Well, these are the issues we shall take up with our guests as we discuss COVID-19 and underlying ailments on Good Morning Nigeria today. It's good to have you join us. My name is Kirian Umai. Welcome to the program.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague here, as always, to welcome you to the program, reaching you, as always, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're right here at Abuja Headquarters Studios, and in the course of the program, we have our regular complimentary segments. These include newspaper review and others. In the meantime, let's take the highlights of the news, and here is Ifeoma Ojinta. Good morning, Ifeoma.
A very good morning, Kingsley and Kirian. Here is the morning news. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, has at midnight 10th May 2020 announced 248 new cases of COVID-19 in Nigeria, increasing the number of confirmed cases to 4,399. Of the new cases, Lagos has 81 confirmed cases, 35 in Jigawa. Borno and Kano have 26 cases each, 20 in Bauchi, 13 in the FCT, and 12 in Edo State. Others are 10 in Sokoto, 7 in Zamfara. Kwara and Kebbi have 4 cases each. Gombe, Taraba, Ogun, and Ekiti have 2 cases each, while Osun and Bayelsa recorded a case each. So far, 778 patients have been discharged, while the death toll is now 143. 160 Nigerian returnees from New York have landed in Abuja. The evacuees had indicated willingness to return home. Consequently, the federal government, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, commissioned Nigerian missions to plan for the successful repatriation of those Nigerians, particularly those stranded because of shutdown in air travels as a result of COVID-19. And the government of Bauchi State has refuted claims that people in Azare Katagum local government are dying from coronavirus complications. The chairman, Bauchi State Task Force on COVID-19, Baba Tella, refuted claims while briefing newsmen on issues emanating from Azare. A journalist in Bauchi has also tested positive for COVID-19.
This death is kind of a seasonal switching of people in that area. This death also that took place in Kano and the rest of them which have been handled, also part of it spilled into Azare. But I tell you, and I'm very sure, the number of deaths is nowhere near what people are saying.
In the meantime, Kano State is making steady progress in COVID-19 response in the last few weeks. This was acknowledged by the leader of the ministerial tax team in the state, Dr. Nasiru Sani Gwazo, during a media briefing in Kano.
We have received quite a number of items from individuals and organizations, including that of the Federal Government, Your Excellency.
Now all the 3 testing centers are operating. And the next issue that we have embarked upon is to ensure adequate supply of samples.
Meanwhile, Kano State on Sunday discharged 10 more COVID-19 patients undergoing treatment in its isolation center, bringing the total number of discharged patients to 32. The State Commissioner for Information, Muhammad Garba, who announced this in a statement, says the patients have fully recovered and tested negative to COVID-19 twice and are ready to reunite with the society. Similarly, 21 patients, 17 male and female, have been discharged from the Lagos Isolation Center. Rivers State Governor Nyesom Wike has made good his threat of demolishing any structure where the Executive Order 6, which banned operation of hotels across the states in deference to COVID-19, is flouted. Governor Wike personally monitored the demolition of 2 hotels in Eleme Council area of the state.
The one that died was in the Mbingi hotels in Rubamase. I never told anybody. And now, because of that contact, we have had about 7 in these cases from the same tracing. So people should help us and support government, let us be safe.
And to curb community spread of COVID-19, Ekiti State government has tightened security at its boundaries with other states while making efforts to procure testing equipment to enhance the fight against the virus. The State Commissioner for Health and Human Services, Dr. Mojisola Yaya Kolade, gave the indication at the state COVID-19 Task Force press briefing in Ado, Ekiti.
Or you choose to go into our isolation center.
And that's the morning news. The program continues with Kingsley and Kirian after this break.
The main way coronavirus spread is when infected people sneeze and cough. Small droplets of fluid expelled by cough or sneezes are laced with viruses looking for new respiratory tracts to infect. When a sick person sneezes around someone who is healthy, the virus can land in the nose, mouth, or even the eyes, causing an infection. Symptoms can include fever, cough, shortness of breath. Symptoms may appear within 2 to 14 days. Seek medical advice if you develop symptoms and have been in close contact with a person known to have COVID-19, or if you live or have recently been in an area with ongoing spread of COVID-19. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
This administration accords priority to the development of our country's railway transportation.
The federal government rail modernization project is all about improving and changing the system of the rail.
New modern rolling stocks are being procured to meet the demand of servicing passenger traffic and also to deal with freight.
The University of Transportation is my attempt at responding to the question of how do we maintain and manage all these infrastructures that you are building.
I would say I'm very impressed, and since boarding, the seats are quite convenient.
And I found it really enjoyable to do this service.
We are introducing the e-ticketing very soon, so that you can buy your ticket wherever. You don't need to go to station.
We want the Nigerians to take ownership of these projects and be partners with us.
In this time of despair, our country, Nigeria, needs us now more than ever. We stand a chance to save our great country, Nigeria. A chance to rise up from this pandemic stronger and better. What will be the gain if we do not learn from other countries and observe the lockdown to stop the further spread of the virus? If we loosen our guards and allow this virus doom our very existence, then what have we gained? This is the call to every Nigerian to unite as one and stop the spread of this deadly virus. Stay at home and stay safe. Remember, the virus doesn't move unless we move. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. Now, let's talk business. Small-scale enterprises say Our entrepreneurs that say they are worst hit by the coronavirus pandemic, and with the ease of lockdown, they are hopeful things will get better. More on this with Abdul Karim Zurumi on Business News.
Nigerian youths have been proactive in the last few years, carving out a niche for themselves in the line of businesses and entrepreneurship. However, in the last few months, the pandemic has caused lots of workplaces and businesses to halt their services as a precautionary measure to reduce the spread of the virus. The ease of lockdown is a welcome one, although these young entrepreneurs aren't finding it easy to conduct their businesses and it's causing a strain. They are altogether hopeful that things will get better eventually, but for now, they are aware that they will have to brave it through.
So definitely I will plead to the government and at the same time plead to the media. They should assist us and pass this message to the government as soon as they can, so that the government can even see that definitely the youth are trying. And we're just trying to make sure we end living, because considering the days that we'll stay back at home, doing nothing, eating the ones we have, there's a saying that once a particular amount goes off your account, no one replacing it, definitely you know what that means. So, and that is what we are facing for now. Because I know other government workers and other private sectors, I know maybe they have their own reasons of survival, but just our business is our reason of survival.
We will update you on the Nigerian Stock Exchange in a subsequent bulletin when the floor closes. With business news, Abdul Karim Zurmi.
Many thanks, Abdul Karim Zurmi, for the business package. Up next is Newspaper Review.
And here is Bayo Atayabi, newspaper reviewer. He's already here in the studio. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kira. Good morning. Good morning, Kinsley.
Right, Bayo, good to see you. I hope you had a pleasant weekend.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, let's begin by taking a look at the Nation newspaper, the front page of the Nation. Of course, virtually all the stories concern COVID-19. So let's begin above the nameplate. It says 160 stranded Nigerians arrived from U.S. begin 14-day isolation. Madagascar's COVID-19 cure drugs sent to Nigeria. Madagascar's COVID-19 cure drugs sent to Nigeria. Details on page 5. Feeding of 9 million kids to begin in FCT. Program takes off. Details on page 8. And then below the nameplate says Kaduna hails troops for stopping bandits. That's on page 4. Chinese illegal miners for trial. Also on page 4. This story says strange deaths. 68 buried in Potiskum in 3 days. With 2 riders, Lawan lodges Yobe government's probe. Sokoto commissioner dies. 150 die in Azare within 30 days, says Bauchi governor. And then you have a number of riders there on COVID-19, and the stories are inside the pages at pages 5 and 6. 28 discharged in Borno, Lagos, and Edo. Another monarch dies in Kano. Kaduna to patients, don't roam. Lawmaker didn't die of virus. Edo screens 104,186, traces 689. 47 health workers infected in Kano. Abia orders closure of motor parks. Umahi, that's governor of Ebonyi, suspends political aids. And as always, the sidebar of the Nation provides the numbers in terms of global infections, global fatalities, and global recoveries. And to the extreme right, you also have comparative figures at the national level. Nigeria, according to the paper now, has 4,399, and unfortunately some 143 persons have died. But the active cases are 3,478. Lagos takes the lead and Kano is second, while the FCT is third. Now, foreign investors free to repatriate funds, says CBN. And right at the foot of the front page, Nigeria's foreign portfolio deficit widens by 356%. Details on page 11.
All right, let's turn to the leadership newspaper from top to bottom. Despite fall in oil prices, investments are secured, says CBN. Banks backdate collection of 50 charges on savings accounts to February. That's the rider to that headline. We have paid armed forces April salaries, says federal government. The story is on page 22. The lead story says experts raise concern as COVID-19 threatens aviation future. We have several riders to that. IATA seeks bailout for sector. IAD urges PMB to lift ban on domestic flights. 160 Nigerians evacuated from U.S. arrive in Abuja. Lagos, Kano, Borno discharged 37 patients. Edo tests 104,186 persons for coronavirus. And now the photo story here is that of Chief Jim Wobodo, the former governor of Old Anambra State, celebrating 80th birthday at Okanano somewhere in Enugu. All right, and the story on the right-hand side of the newspaper says Bauchi governor confirms 150 deaths in Azare, declares total lockdown of 3 local government areas. And of course, the story is on page 7. Now, the stories are right at the bottom of the newspaper. Lockdown not slowing anti-corruption fight, says EFCC and ICPC. It's on page 22. IFC to fund MSME in poor countries with $3.2 billion. It's on page 15. Now, 8 killed, houses destroyed as Taraba crisis escalates. It's on page 23. Ex-Kano district head Yusuf Bayero, Sokoto commissioner, die. It's on page 22 for details. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Kirian. Well, Kirian and Kingsley, you recall on Friday when we had 381 cases, reported cases, we said that was the highest ever. The next day, Saturday, we registered 386. On Saturday, by late Saturday evening, 239 were recorded. And just late last night, another 248. So within that spate of 3 days, we have had 873 cases. Nigeria's cases now stand at 4,399. Now, out of that 4,399, that is already a fifth of that were recorded only in 3 days. That is to tell you the extent to which the infection is increasing the rate. The death rate in that period too was, now we have lost 38 of our compatriots. The total death rate so far is 143. The 248 new cases late last night were from 17 states of the Federation. Lagos is still the topmost, but Jigawa has now shot up with 26 cases, Borno 26, Kano 20, Bauchi 13. The Federal Capital Territory that used to be next to Lagos registered 12, Edo 10. The others are in a single digit. Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu is already warned that the ease of lockdown is being abused and is not observed, and he may be compelled to reintroduce it again. Globally, 4 million, over 4 million people have been infected with about 277,000 deaths. A quarter of those cases are in the United States. 1/3 of the deaths are also in the U.S. In the U.S., they've taken a measure now. All personnel working in nursing homes are to be tested twice in the week. This is because 1/3 of all the deaths in the U.S. are from nursing homes. In the United Kingdom, 346 deaths were recorded between Friday and Saturday. So, COVID-19 is still on the rampage,
yes,
and we need to watch out. And when we come back home, there are concerns here because the states are reporting different instances. In Yobe State, just before last weekend, there were indications about 100 deaths reported in Potiskum and Geshua. The commissioner then, Dr. Mohammed Lawan, has said autopsies will be conducted. This morning, there's more to the number. They said over 100 now. In Bauchi 2, the deputy governor, Bala Taylor, was on record to have said that it is not hundreds of people that died. There were only 30 that had died. And he said this is as a result of seasonal increase in temperatures. Usually during seasons when there's high temperature or extreme low cold temperature, there's a tendency that the aged people tend to die, and he was attributed that. But late yesterday, the governor himself has imposed lockdown on Azare, Gaide, and Zaki local government area. Across the border in Jigawa State, the same thing is happening. Dozens of people, mostly advanced in age, have died in Hadija, Jigawa State. They are already calling for the kind of inquisition that was done in Kano to come and certify the situation. Again, they are all alluding to high temperature. But if you look closely, you see that Kano, Jigawa, Bauchi, Yobe, they are all contiguous states within that same, what is described as meningitis belt.
I find it difficult to totally believe that the deaths should be attributed to a high temperature, because we've not had such in recent times from those areas, before the advent of coronavirus. In fact, the ubiquitous nature of COVID-19 is of great concern. And in some states, the thing gets in there and nobody takes notice of that, until perhaps we have an index case who might be from a government official, who tell the public what is happening to him before the search for contact tracing, starts. So the idea is that I think it took them unawares. Under normal circumstances. It doesn't really mean that people don't die of other ailments, as case may be. But coronavirus has a way of escalating underlying, ailments. And before you know it, if the person is aged, of course, what you get is death. So Jigawa has called for assistance. It's very important that happens so that they can ramp up, testing in those areas to determine the real reason why people are dying in great numbers within a space of, 2 or 3 days.
And our compatriots, 160, arrived Abuja 11 a.m. yesterday. They were from the United States. There were 92 males, 60 females, and 8 infants. They arrived by Ethiopian airline, and they have since moved into isolation. The previous day, 253 Nigerians arrived from United Kingdom on Friday. They touched down at about 1:45 p.m., but they were stranded for a long time. Because of mix-up in the arrangement to evacuate them. There were indications that they were supposed to have been moved to Abuja, but apparently they were stranded for a long time before that. If you add the 265 that came on earlier on for United Arab Emirates, so over the weekend, we have now had 678 of our compatriots that have been evacuated from foreign countries back home.
Okay, I want to return to the subject of the so-called strange death.
Yes.
As you have indicated, and we also, Kiran, who read from the papers. Okay, the Azare deaths are being attributed, on the one hand, to the change in weather conditions. So the weather is hot, XYZ. In the meantime, the state government has also imposed a lockdown. Do you use a lockdown to attack hot weather conditions or the effects of harsh weather conditions? Is it a lockdown that you use? What is the purpose of a lockdown? If the weather is hot, then you know what to do, not a lockdown. That's one. Secondly, so that we don't seem to be living in denial all over again. There were some claims that those persons who were dying were the aged, and that such deaths are also usually recorded during the Ramadan period. Some of those explanations were provided for the unexplained deaths in Yobe State. And then the question to ask is, aren't there guidelines for fasting during Ramadan or during Lent? In this case, we are talking about Ramadan. I mean, Bayo, you will explain this more. I mean, if you have a medical condition, then you don't get into fasting. And assuming that it is always a recurrent phenomenon that during this period you have a number of old persons or short persons who are dying, what is it that the respective governments in those locations are doing to at least mitigate, if not otherwise reduce the number of persons who die yearly? Do we just accept it that, at this time people just die and then they just die, and then you can see the graves that they are digging, fresh graves, and the grave diggers are telling you that their work rate is unusual.
Exactly. Well, you see, if whatever the case is, I think the best approach would have been to assume that there must be a COVID-19 situation, because if it is there, with those underlying ailments, COVID-19 enhances the rapidity to death.
Exactly.
Therefore, the best approach would have been to assume that it's COVID-19 and then do the reverse and try to confirm the otherwise.
In fact, that's already been assumed. From what Kingsley said, you have already said there should be lockdown in some country areas. But you're already addressing it. With one of the measures that the world has been applying in terms of, mitigating or rather reducing the spread of coronavirus. So already it has started. Lockdown is a sign that the government understands that after all said and done, COVID-19 has a hand in what is happening to a very reasonable extent.
Okay, and then the other one, I read the story, Bio. I just take it before the editorial comes. I read it on the front page. It says Madagascar's COVID-19 cure drugs sent to Nigeria. It's on page 5. Yes. Two of the paragraphs from that story are as follows. Nigeria's consignment of the drug has been freighted to Equatorial Guinea, from where it will be airlifted to Abuja. For ease of transportation, African countries were divided into zones, leading to the freighting of Nigeria's consignments to Equatorial Guinea. There is pressure, however, on the federal government by different medical and scientific organizations to allow NIPRIT and NAFDAC to subject the drugs to further analysis.
Well, from our indications, look as if it's a donation from Madagascar across countries in Africa. Here we have a cure. If you want, try it, use it. As at the last count, Madagascar had 193 cases, and 101 have recovered, and up to now they have no single death. Whether we like it or not, apparently the drug seems to be working, because even they refuse to lock down. Children are going to school, and what they call the COVID organic is being given to even pupils to take at a specific rate twice a day, and they seem to be getting results. But be that as it may, Madagascar had that homemade solution. What are we doing about trying our homemade solution? If we wait until we can do the clinical test that takes such a long time, we will continue to wait for the World Health Organization.
See, let's just make it clear, in this conversation, that the president of Madagascar first took a dose of that on TV to convince his people that this can be consumed. That's number one. Number two is that when you bring it to Nigeria and one says, let's take it to clinical tests and all of that, that is bringing politics into it. There are no two ways about it. This is something that has been tested. Why not get volunteers, some persons who already have been affected, by coronavirus, to say, look, I want to take this dose. Don't test, because it's been tested in another country. I'm not saying there's no need for you to go through it and even know what is there. And Nigeria has such plans. Nigeria has the plans from which is a precursor, to the production of that. What that Madagascar has. We have it. So why not Nibri and other establishments in Nigeria go looking for that plant in Nigeria and start their own concoction with it?
I think the World Health Organization has also said that the Madagascar COVID organic drug has not been clinically tested. And that is why they are cautioning everybody about using it. And conventionally, before drugs are administered on human beings, it takes a very long process. In fact, currently, because of the challenge of COVID-19, that is why the World Health Organization is looking for a means of shortcut to go by the clinical procedure so that they can
if
get
that drug had come from Italy or any part of Europe, do you understand? All these discussions will not be there. It just be administered immediately. What about remdesivir? They are administering it, right? Which, of course, didn't work for Ebola. But that's okay, let's try it. So these things are trial. WHO has no answer. Currently, they have no answer.
And in any case, there are some approved drugs that fail.
Exactly.
Yes.
So let's get to editorial, gentlemen. Daily Sun newspaper, that's where we are getting the editorial for today. It's titled The Reduction of Oil Output. But Kingsley and I analyzed that title to say, look, it's better put this way, the reduction in oil output. Right. So, of course, the story is the reduction in oil output by Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, members in response to the fall in oil price occasioned by COVID-19 pandemic is understandable. So how understandable is that, Bio?
Well, what the editorial is saying that the recent challenge brought about by COVID-19 has made sure that oil prices have become a glut. There's a glut in the world market. And for us in Nigeria, our budget projection has been reduced twice. First to $30 and then secondly to $20. And still, our Brent is still about $18. So the goods are not there. And the GMD of the NNPC is saying that we have 50 cargoes of crude oil in the world market that nobody is asking for. We have about 12 cargoes too of LNG that nobody is asking for. And the editorial is happening on the fact that, well, this is a second warning for us to diversify our economy. The initiative that has been taken to diversify the economy away from oil to other sources is germane, but it has now, the situation now has warranted a double initiative to continue, especially area of solid minerals is one of our strengths. We are making initiatives in agriculture. We are able to feed ourselves. We stop importing rice, but with farmers not able to go to farm because of COVID-19, there is shortage of food likely to be facing us in the short distance future. So to what the editorial is saying, therefore, is that the initiative to diversify our economy must be double spaced.
Yes, even going too far talking about solid mineral, which takes a long time to to mature. They'll tell you that they're doing a period of trying to establish a favorable contract with perhaps the miners who are naturally multinational companies across the globe. It takes a lot of time to establish. But we have billions of cubics of raw gas. I mean, that can even be transformed into methanol or ethanol, as the case may be. And these are viable alternatives. If you do not get to gas, we have it. And they're being flared up, being flared in Niger Delta for so many years. So we're going too far talking about the solid minerals. There are a lot that we could do in terms of diversification.
Okay, well, Kirian, there are issues in the oil and gas sector. You talked about availability of gas. Nigeria is actually referred to more as a gas country rather than crude oil per se. But there are investment decisions to be made. The gas is right there, it's buried in the bowels of the earth, but you have to have investors, and these are the IOCs and others who have the technical expertise to drill down, strike the gas, and then begin to produce. And then you have all kinds of things that are involved. That's why there's always a talk of having the regulatory framework, being the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, that should govern all of that. So it's a long haul always, but I think that these are issues we'll continue to return to.
We have the wherewithal. That's just the point. We have the wherewithal to do that without even the foreign experts.
Which wherewithal now? Is it
the wherewithal in terms of the technical ability?
No. Investment?
Of course, investment. Why can't government invest in it? What's the point if we're investing in crude oil? Why can't we invest in gas?
No, Kieran, there are experts in oil and gas who will also be watching this.
Oh, exactly.
The Nigerian government doesn't have the funding to bankroll such activities.
You borrow and invest.
No,
that's what
not you.
Do.
Not
you borrow and invest well.
Not you.
If you borrow and invest well, the dividends will enable you to pay back the loan.
Big money will come from investors. You can only supplement because it is huge. You are already borrowing. How much do you think we are owing already now?
I say borrow and invest properly. That's as simple as that. Nations are doing it, and it's transforming the nations. You borrow and invest properly.
The alternative which I mentioned, that is the solid mineral. Already, artisan wells have been licensed now in 2 states in Zamfara, and I think in the Osun state. Those are the steps to go. They should carry it for other, apart from gold, for other solid minerals.
The gestation period will take 10 years.
Not even gestation now. You are having all these illegal Chinese miners who are all over the place.
Course, because you allow the area.
You
allow them to go in there.
The minister the other day was bemoaning the presence of these illegal elements. And that some of them have backing from from upstairs, whatever he says that is. Baya Toyebe, we'll have to terminate this now. Thank you for being around. We'll see you tomorrow. Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll get ahead with COVID-19 and underlying ailments.
The coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, is spreading at an alarming rate all over the globe, including Nigeria. With the number of infected persons in Nigeria increasing daily, prevention is better than cure. Coronavirus has no cure. The virus spreads from one person, who affects 2 persons, and by the time the affected person is isolated, the 2 persons have affected 4, and it keeps spreading. You must take preventive measures to save yourself and that of the people around you. Always wash your hands with soap and water. Put distance between yourself and others. Whenever you cough or sneeze, cover your mouth. Clean and disinfect surfaces. Stay at home if you're sick and contact the proper authorities. Together, we can cut down the spread of the coronavirus. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest TV network.
Welcome, dear. Have you washed your hands?
I'm inside my house again. This thing not the key black man.
I don't know if it's misinformation or poor hygiene that will kill you first. Coronavirus is real, and good hygiene practice will save your life. Anyway, no hand washing, no eating.
I will not take care of it. How's one of the parents?
Coronavirus is real and it's on the rise. But you can help yourself and help others to be safe. Remember, we can stop the spread. It's in your hands.
This message is from the Akinfade Foundation in partnership with the National Orientation Agency with support from MacArthur Foundation.
Do you not know that our enemies have no face? They are indigents of no state. They come from no place. And if this boat capsizes, every one of us will go under. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do not say, I am the Iroko when the forest is burning. Do not say, I am the Obeche when the forest is burning. Our differences will not stop us from perishing together. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer.
Just don't understand this coronavirus thing. Is it real?
See, coronavirus, known as COVID-19, it's a global problem and has killed thousands of people in China, Italy, Spain, UK, US, and other countries around the world.
Okay. Now, why are they saying that we should stay home?
Because if you go outside and get in contact with someone who is infected, you become affected and then come back home, affect your family. That's how it happens in other countries.
Now, please, help me explain what this social distance is all about.
See, as we are now, the virus travels through the air and by touch. We must maintain 6-foot distance at all times.
Oh, so it's not by washing my hands with soap and water or hand sanitizer that is only important?
Washing of our hands regularly is very important. But we must come together and fight this virus like we did Ebola. It is our responsibility to each other.
Coronavirus is real. Steps to avoid this pandemic. Wash your hands regularly or sanitize your hands. Keep social and physical distancing. Avoid crowded places. Stay at home unless absolutely necessary. Don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth if your hands are not clean. Avoid the spread of coronavirus. Coronavirus is real.
And the program is Good Morning Nigeria, and we thank you for staying with us up to this moment. We are discussing COVID-19 and the underlying ailments. Now, to, of course, set the mood for the conversation, here is a background report as put together by our correspondent Aisha Ubali.
It is said that coronavirus can infect people with underlying medical conditions. The question is, what are these conditions? According to experts, some of the underlying conditions that may put persons at higher risk include chronic lung disease and asthma, heart disease, those undergoing cancer treatment, and anyone with diabetes, kidney or liver failure. Others include those with immune deficiencies, poorly controlled HIV/AIDS. Also, people with a severe obesity with body mass index that is above 40 are listed to be at risk of severe illness and death if they contract coronavirus. The role of the immune system is to protect against disease or other potentially damaging pathogens, and this is why a strong immune system is needed to help stave off coronavirus infection. 8 out of 10 deaths reported in the U.S. have been in adults ages 65 and older, according to the Center for Disease Control. Older adults have also been more likely to require hospitalization and admission to an intensive care unit. Experts say this is because the quality of their lung tissue also declines over time, becoming more elastic and making respiratory diseases such as COVID-19 of major concern because of the potential for lung damage. Some cancer treatments such as chemotherapy, cancer drugs, radiotherapy or steroids are targeted towards cancer cells, can temporarily weaken the immune system because they diminish the number of white blood cells created in the bone marrow. What should people with underlying medical conditions do to protect themselves from contracting coronavirus or, at worst, manage their conditions?
Many thanks, Aisha Obale, for that background. We have guests with us here in the studios, as well as at remote locations. So we're going to have to introduce them right away. Dr. Bello Abubakar, who is president of the African Organization for Research and Training in Cancer, and also chief consultant clinical and radiation oncologist at the National Hospital in Abuja. Pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria, Dr. Abubakar.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Also here with us in the studios is Dr. Olalekan Olatishe. Dr. Olatishe is a consultant physician and nephrologist. Pleasure to have you around on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
All right, and joining us from our Kano studio is Professor Mahmoud Omar Sani. Professor Sani is a cardiologist, and it's my pleasure to welcome him to the program. Good morning, sir, and welcome to our program.
Nigeria, thank you for having me.
And via Skype here in Abuja is Dr. Vivian Kwahe. She is a head infectious disease unit, University of Abuja Teaching Hospital, Gwagwalada. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good morning.
All right. Once again, our pleasure to have the physicians and specialists with us as guests this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. Let's begin by just breaking this down so that our viewers can have a better understanding of it. Since the advent of coronavirus, there are two expressions that we've been hearing. One is comorbidities, and the other is underlying ailments. Exactly what are we referring to when we say comorbidities or when we say underlying ailments, and why should they be significant at this time? Let's begin with Dr. Bello Abubakar.
Okay, thank you very much. Comorbidities, underlying illness are basically one and the same. In other words, if somebody has another disease that is existing before the advent of the other primary disease, like the COVID-19, we'll say that that person actually has a comorbidity. Take, for example, if the patient develops COVID-19 infection and has had cancer, for example, any type of cancer, that is a comorbidity, that is an underlying illness. If he has hypertension, if he has diabetes, and so on and so forth, those are underlying illnesses. These are diseases that are chronic, These are diseases that have persisted and will continue to persist even after the treatment of the COVID-19. So those are underlying illnesses. One will not say that malaria, for example, is a comorbidity, because malaria is something that you will treat immediately and then it goes away for literally ever until you have another infection. However, if at the time that you develop the COVID-19 infection, you have also malaria, that can be considered as a comorbidity at that point in time. So I think that's very clear.
All right, but it's also interesting to note from what you've said that malaria may not necessarily, be an underlying illness, except when, of course, the last thing you said, except when that has occurred when you're already having a coronavirus. I said so because malaria is the commonest ailment that we have on the African continent now. Okay, let me bring in Dr. Olatiche here, along the same line of trying to define, what it means to have underlying ailments. I wanted also to look at what is called opportunistic infections, or as the case may be, while you are treating the major one. So let us know the synergy, between the two, the opportunistic and of course the underlying ailments.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the comment. When we talk about underlying conditions, opportunistic infections, we're talking about those conditions in which will make one suffer a severe form of the disease. In this case, COVID-19 infection. Any condition that will make you come down with a severe form or, suffer a severe form of the disease. Those are the people who will be needing hospitalizations, the ones who are likely to go to the ICU, the ones who are likely to be needing ventilators, mechanical ventilation. So any condition, health condition that makes you suffer or come down with a disproportionate form of the disease can be said to be an underlying condition, and there are so many of them. We talk about diabetes, we talk about hypertension, we talk about heart disease, lung disease, people who are smoking, people who have COPD, those ones who have end-stage kidney disease, the ones who have cancers. And then, of course, the CDC lately included obesity as one of the underlying conditions. There's obesity, morbid obesity, precisely. Those who have a BMI of greater or equal to 40 kilograms per meter squared. So these ones can be said to be the ones who are likely to come down with a severe form of COVID-19.
Okay, Dr. Latisha, thank you very much. Let's go over to Professor Mahmoud Sani in our Kano Network Center. He's a cardiologist. Still on the conceptual clarification, Professor Sani, give us your take on exactly what underlying ailments or comorbidities refer to, together with what Kieran asked just now about so-called opportunistic ailments. Now, in particular, I would like you to clarify this, because we remember when, shall we say now, HIV and AIDS was reigning, there was always the reference to the fact that the killer in HIV and AIDS is the opportunistic ailment that will come. So exactly what are we looking at? They will tell you if a person has TB, that is tuberculosis, for instance, and the person has HIV, then the tendency will be for that opportunistic ailment, being tuberculosis, to be the killer of that individual. So how do we understand all of this in the context of COVID-19?
Thank you very much for having me once again. I agree with what Dr. Bello mentioned earlier. Underlying conditions are conditions that are chronic and they require long-term treatment. He mentioned, and I agree with him, things like hypertension, diabetes, kidney disease, heart disease. So they're all chronic conditions and they require long-term treatment. On the other hand, opportunistic infections are infections that will not have occurred in an otherwise healthy person with competent immune system. If somebody is immunocompromised for any reason, having like HIV, as you mentioned, having on treatment for cancer, or having taken steroids, they are all conditions that will make the immune system to be weak. So these infections will only come and affect someone if their immune system is weak, but they will not have occurred ordinarily if the immune system is very competent. So in reality, is underlying conditions are conditions that are chronic and they require long-term treatment. While opportunistic infections are infections that happen in people who are immunocompromised. So in the context of COVID-19, we will be discussing about underlying conditions because they have been shown to actually predispose patients to acquire the disease. They have also been shown to have these patients, when they have the disease, they have severe illness and the outcomes are poorer. And of course, patients who are immunocompromised also, for various reasons, have increased susceptibility to having COVID-19. So in them, COVID-19 kind of becomes, in quote, opportunistic, because they are immunocompromised already and they have very high tendency to have very severe disease and they can even die from it.
Yes, I want to remain with you, Prof, because you mentioned very two key points here. You talked about compromised immune system. You also talked about someone who has a chronic disease. Well, I want you to liken this, to the scenario that played out in Kano in recent times with respect to COVID-19 and the number of deaths, recorded in Kano. Professionally speaking, are you looking at it from the point of view of persons who have compromised immune system, who have chronic disease, and of course the COVID-19 eventually, which, as you said, became the opportunistic ailment? Was that responsible for the number of deaths recorded in Kano in recent times?
Well, to me, what happened in Kano is probably a number of factors played out. One, we must have had community transmission already happening, even probably we have the first identified case. Two, we have quite a number of patients who have chronic illnesses, and therefore they are predisposed to having COVID-19. And three, as we mentioned, that a number of patients that we have not tested them to confirm that they have COVID-19 patients. But my take is most likely some of them may have died from COVID-19. And my reason is because a number of hospital workers that have come in contact with these patients who have chronic illnesses, who presented with symptoms that look like COVID-19 but have not been tested until they die, eventually became infected with the virus. And so it makes sense, it's plausible to say that probably that some of them might have died from COVID-19. But we also have to remember that COVID-19 has overstretched our health system. And a number of patients with chronic illnesses did not have access to health care for various reasons. One, many of them are afraid to even come to hospital because they don't want to get infected. Two, even the health workers, because of lack of protection, they don't feel very comfortable seeing all the patients. And therefore, another factor that may have contributed to the death is a worsening of their underlying conditions without necessarily having them having COVID-19. Because if people have chronic heart failure, for example, if they have chronic kidney disease, if they have liver failure, and then because they get worse and they don't have access to care, they can die from that, not necessarily because they have COVID-19. So I think it's a contribution of quite a number of factors. But I believe some of the death must have been from COVID-19. That's my take.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Sani. We'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. Now, let's bring in Dr. Vivian Kwahe, who is the head of the Infectious Disease Unit at the University of Abuja Teaching Hospital in Gwagwalada. Dr. Kwahe, let's have you on the screen. We had you on Good Morning Nigeria some weeks ago, and of course, you told us of the experience you and members of your team were having to go through in managing persons who had come down with COVID-19. On that occasion, I recall you saying that you don't go home, that a proprietor had volunteered his hotel where you normally would pass the night and pass several nights. I hope now that your tour of duty permits you to go home. That's one. But more importantly, tell us, because you are seeing these patients directly, what is the correlation between COVID-19 and so-called underlying ailments?
Okay, thank you once more for having me this morning on Good Morning NTA. First of all, I'll want to start by saying that we are still at the facility where we've been putting up since we started managing the COVID-19 cases. Initially, we were in the hotel, but right now we've been moved to the trauma center in the hospital. So we are actually staying in the hospital. Over the past 6 weeks, we've not been able to go home to our families. Of course, this is because we pose a risk to our family members. If we, after having close contact with COVID-19 cases, we go back every day to interact with our family members and other people in the community. So that is the main reason why we have been sort of quarantined in this facility. We don't know for how long we'll be here, but I believe as things unfold, we may be able to go home. Maybe in the next couple of weeks, we may be able to go home. Let's see how things go. And now concerning comorbidities or underlying illness, opportunistic infections, and the coronavirus. Well, like my colleagues have already mentioned, comorbidities or underlying infections are chronic diseases like diabetes, like hypertension, like lung diseases, like sickle cell disease, like HIV, that these patients are already managing their chronic diseases, and then when they get COVID-19, those diseases become comorbidities, okay? Because that makes the severity of the COVID-19 to be more in the people in this category of patients. Both severity and even mortality is higher among people with underlying comorbidities or underlying diseases. Opportunistic infections are a little bit different. Opportunistic infections are infections that ordinarily someone will not get except their immune system has been affected. Okay, ordinarily you will not get that infection except you have an underlying immunodeficiency. So we talked about opportunistic infections in the context of HIV. HIV is an immunosuppressive condition, or not only HIV, patients on cancer chemotherapy, that's an immunosuppressive condition. So when you have these conditions and then you now have an infection that ordinarily will not cause disease in normal people, this class of people now come down with disease from these infections. And we're talking about infections like pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia that ordinarily will not cause disease in normal healthy people, but will cause disease in patients that are immunosuppressed. So in that context, I would not want to consider COVID-19 as an opportunistic infection, because we know without diabetes, if you are exposed to COVID-19, you will come down with the disease. We know without HIV, if you are exposed to coronavirus, you will come down with COVID-19. So in that context, I will not want to consider COVID-19 as an opportunistic infection, because both the immunocompetent and the immunosuppressed are susceptible to the infection. So that is that. I just want to make that that distinction between underlying disease and immunosuppression and opportunistic infection as far as COVID-19 is concerned. For us here, the little we have seen, we've managed about 75 cases now. The most common underlying diseases that we are seeing are diseases like diabetes, diseases like hypertension, diseases like lung diseases, people that have underlying lung diseases, COPD, okay, or any cause of fibrosis in the lungs. Such categories of patients come down with severe COVID-19, and mortality is higher among these patients. Okay, surprisingly, we've managed 2 HIV patients. When they came in, we were worried that they will run a severe course, but they had mild disease, and we discharged them after about 14 days of management. We had a case of sickle cell disease. Even though sickle cell is a comorbidity, we had a sickle cell disease patient that came in again. We were afraid. We thought she would run a severe course of COVID-19. But luckily for us, she just had a mild disease. And after about 20 days on hospital admission, she was discharged. So what I have seen is that not all comorbidities, the disease will not run a severe course in all the comorbidities that we have mentioned. From the little experience that I have seen, like I have mentioned, HIV patients and a sickle cell disease patient that came in, they both had mild disease. On the other hand, some diabetic patients have run a severe course, and hypertensive patients, and then those with underlying lung diseases, those ones, in fact, like a patient we lost 2 days ago, a non-diabetic hypertensive patient that came in with COVID-19. When we did the chest X-ray and we looked at the X-ray, I said, oh my God, this one, the prognosis is very guarded. We may not succeed in this particular case because the lung fields were completely gone. So we're suspecting maybe this patient had an underlying tuberculosis that was not diagnosed. He was a police officer. Maybe he had underlying tuberculosis. We know that diabetic patients are prone to TB. Even police officers that have a close contact with the public, they are also at a higher risk of contacting tuberculosis. So the chest had the typical features you will find in a patient with advanced TB. And the following day after we got that chest X-ray result, the patient actually passed on. So patients that have an underlying lung fibrosis, they are at a higher risk of running a severe course, and mortality is much, much higher among those people.
Actually, so I appreciate your explanation, Dr. Kwahe, because you are right there at the center of it all. As one person who has been on the front line since the beginning of this fight, we appreciate that. And of course, you've told us a number of things that we need to learn from this virus. As comorbidities in some cases lead to high mortality. And that is why we have brought in this particular topic for discussion this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed. We'll get back to you for further explanations. Now back to Abuja. Let me ask Dr. Biola Abubakar to react to what she has itemized, being someone who is on the front line.
Okay, so she has alluded to so many things. One of the first things she mentioned is that they've been there for 6 weeks. They couldn't go home. I want to believe that is because not only that they are exposed to their family, because what I do know is that people get decontaminated and they can have time to actually go home. They get cleaned, and if there is a need, they test them regularly and make sure that there is no infection, and they can be allowed. But one of the key things we have in this country is the lack of the expertise, the lack of professionals. That may be one of the real reasons why they are keeping them, all of them. So that is one. Now, coming back to the comorbidities or underlying ailments, as the case may be, you do recall that the first person that died in this country had multiple myeloma. This is a form of cancer. Okay, so and he came back from UK, probably had a chemotherapy, and that chemotherapy will actually suppress his bone marrow and suppress his immunity, and as a result of that, he can have all those opportunistic infections, in which, and then also the susceptibility of having COVID-19 positive. So that may be the real culprit that actually killed him. Now, what I don't know, or so far I haven't heard, is that whether they are involving primary clinicians when they are treating those patients. Now, if you have cancer, it will be expected that it is not only the COVID-19 that is going to be treated. You should involve a cancer specialist in the treatment of that patient. The same thing goes for somebody that have a COPD, that you will involve a pulmonologist in the management of that patient, at least a physician, or if somebody has a renal disease, you will involve a nephrologist, and so on and so forth. I don't see that actually happening. I haven't seen any, at least at the National Hospital, it's not happening. Maybe because we did not have most of these patients. The last thing she mentioned also is the issue of the HIV patients. There were studies that were conducted in Spain that showed that HIV patients actually have less susceptibility to COVID-19. So even if they develop the disease, they have a very low course of the disease. The reason is not far-fetched because they have been on antiviral drugs, right? So antiviral drugs will help also in containing the COVID-19 infection. And I know that one of the key drugs that is being used for very severe cases are some combination of antiviral drugs. So that is why HIV patients are, in quotes, almost immune. There are those that are almost immune to COVID-19. But cancer patients are much more susceptible because they undergo radiation, they undergo chemotherapy. And chemotherapy is a systemic treatment that will actually suppress your bone marrow. That means the white cells are suppressed and you have a worse chance of developing any infection for that matter. And COVID-19 is one of the infections that you can easily develop. So I think that's the things.
Okay, Dr. Bello, thank you very much. I want to bring in Dr. Olatishe here. We'll now be talking about the management of underlying conditions for persons who have COVID-19. In general, the reports we do get, they are setting up isolation centers and looking for ventilators and PPEs and all of that. On the basis of the expert opinions that you have profiled on this program, and indeed what, shall we say, is pre-existing knowledge, what is the protocol in all of this? You're a nephrologist. Yeah. Now, you have a patient who has, renal issues. And unfortunately, the patient also now comes down with COVID-19. And that person is taken to an isolation center. And perhaps the renal patient is supposed to have dialysis once or twice a week. Is there a dialysis machine in the isolation center? And then how should such a patient be managed?
Thank you very much. These are some of the gaps that we still have in our system, as Dr. Bello has mentioned. Patients who have COVID-19 can actually come down with, they can have an underlying condition like kidney disease. They may be requiring dialysis. And let me say this, there's still a lot unknown about this virus. Various studies will tell you, it is safe to have them dialyzed in an isolated center where you just, we don't have such centers, we don't have such resources to just dedicate a particular room or a place for this set of patients to have their dialysis. And so these are still gaps that we have to fill. And because we still don't know a lot about the virus, we have various studies, like what he talked about, HIV patients not coming down with the severe form of the disease. We're not 100% sure. Same way we have patients who have had kidney transplant, who some studies are for the fact that, they do well. They don't. Well, a few studies would say, we lose quite a number of them. Some of these studies, we found out that they grouped every solid organ transplant patients together. Lung cancer. So now we're beginning to know that, okay, well, those ones with lung diseases who have had lung transplant have higher morbidity or mortality as against those who just have kidney transplant. So a lot is still unknown about this disease. We do not have the resources to dedicate centers to dialyze these patients. However, there has been few guidelines which the CDC and WHO have put together to help us manage these patients when they do need dialysis, because we know that they can actually, you can have what we call acute kidney injury in these patients because of the so-called cytokine storm that they can have, leading to organ damage and, of course, acute kidney injury. So when we do have such patients, it's nice to have them isolated, dialyzed in a separate environment as against dialyzing them with other patients, so that we do not get these other patients infected.
Kieran, I just wondered, Dr. Watisha, tell us this. I see what we are seeing about isolation centers. Some of the isolation centers are being set up in stadia. Some, of course, are in hospital complexes, and I haven't been to one, to see beyond the beds and perhaps a few gadgets around there, whether an isolation center can actually serve as a care center for persons with underlying ailments, other than, say, perhaps diabetes and, shall we say, hypertension.
Well, those isolation centers are, like you said, are better for patients who have the disease, but they are not down with the severe form of the disease. The ones that are really down with the severe forms of the disease will actually need to be nursed in an ICU. And of course, when you have an ICU, you have facilities for CRT, continuous renal replacement therapy. Then you'll be able to offer them either take over their breathing, even though now we're beginning to see that more studies are coming up, and we're beginning to see that putting them on ventilator can actually be counterproductive. But when you have patients who have a severe form of the disease, they need to be nursed in an ICU. And in an ICU, in a standard ICU, you should have facilities to be able to offer them dialysis, to be able to support their blood pressure, inotropic support, and of course, perhaps even take over their breathing if required. And so the isolation centers are just meant, like the word, to take these sets of people away from the society, prevent them from infecting others, and then also offer them basic medications, for those who have mild to moderate form of the disease. But the ones that will have a severe form, we actually need to be in a proper hospital setting. And so in our way for looking forward to what we are doing in our country, we should, as we are setting up these isolation centers, we should also be thinking of setting up more hospitals. Hospitals that have standard ICU, where some of these facilities, we should identify them now and prepare them for such. Because at the end of the day, it's those ones that will lead to high mortality. What we do not want is having a lot of Nigerians dying from this disease. But the way it is now, we have community spread. There's very little that we can do with talking about people coming down with the infection. But we do not want to have record deaths. And I think that's the way we should look at less of the isolation centers now. I think we have enough. We should identify hospitals with standard ICU and begin to prepare them for the treatment of those that will come down with the severe form of the disease. And then the other thing I think we should mention here is to look at how Nigerians should boost their immunity so that we don't have, we have more, we should look at those things that we need to do to keep our immunity at top notch. So that if for peradventure we have this disease, we wouldn't come down with the severe form of the disease.
All right, that's interesting. We return to Kano, where we have Professor Mahmoud Omar Sani. Professor Sani, part of the explanation by Dr. Olatiche is that the world is still studying the biological behavior of coronavirus. But I also read through a text, from Italy last week that a pharmacist, came up with an analogy which says that the virus attacks the red blood corpuscles, which is responsible for pumping energy, into the system. I'm not sure how right she is, but then she is saying that if there could be a treatment that will stop the virus from attacking that aspect of a human chemistry, that has a huge responsibility in the system, that can be solved. But be that as it may, I want you to talk as a cardiologist. And if someone is down with coronavirus and, of course, has underlying heart disease, how best can such person be treated? Because Dr. Bello Abubakar did say earlier on that there should be primary clinicians, in every aspect, especially when someone has underlying illness. And we hear often that in Kano, as you also pointed out a short while ago, that many medical personnel are refusing to treat persons with underlying ailments, whether they have symptoms of COVID-19 or not. What's your take?
Very much. Before I answer this question, I want to clarify. When I explained about opportunistic infections, and I mentioned in court, I didn't say that COVID-19 is opportunistic. I was trying just to explain the concept of being opportunistic. So I totally agree with what Dr. Kwahe said. COVID is not considered as opportunistic, but I was explaining that for those who are immunocompromised, the concept is that for them, it could be. So I agree with that totally. Now, coming back to the question you mentioned, as a cardiologist, to us, the clinical context in which COVID-19 affects us are one. COVID-19 affects our patients because our patients with cardiac disease are predisposed to COVID-19. Two, COVID-19 is believed to cause cardiac disease directly by causing acute myocardial injury. It can predispose to heart attack. It can predispose to worsening heart failure through various mechanisms. Three, also drugs that are used to treat COVID-19 may affect some cardiac function in a way, like chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. We know that they cause some abnormality on the ECG and can predispose to arrhythmias. And then four, healthcare workers that treat these patients. Cardiologists come in very close proximity to the patient when they treat them, and they're predisposed to having the disease because of the close proximity they have with our patients. So if a patient has underlying cardiac condition and he develops COVID-19, as mentioned by Dr. Bello, ideally there should be a teamwork between the ID physicians, the cardiologists, the cardiac surgeons, the nurses, everybody that is involved in management, so that they sit on a table and discuss the patient and agree on the treatment. I think that, as mentioned by Letitia, our understanding is evolving, but I think that it has to do a lot with planning. I believe that isolation centers, yes, they should be kept for patients who have mild disease, but at the same time, we should have dedicated case management centers. And these centers should be equipped with all necessary equipment that this patient might require, including dialysis machine, because we know that COVID-19 causes multi-organ dysfunction or multi-organ failure. They come with heart failure, their lungs become diseased, their kidneys fail. So all the requirements for treatment should have ideally been reserved in a proper case management center, so that when these patients require those facilities to be managed, they are managed appropriately. So the issue is planning, and I don't believe that it has to do only with resources. I think the resources may have been available. It's just that we need to plan appropriately so that when these patients get the requirement to use this facility, they get the facility to use. In our setting, in our hospital, we had a patient who was admitted came through the emergency, she is known hypertension, diabetes with chronic heart disease. She came with symptoms that looked like COVID-19, and eventually she turned out to be positive. And along the line, she developed acute kidney injury that warranted her to be dialyzed. And luckily for us, we have a new dialysis machine that has not been used, and so it was allocated and she was dialyzed, even though eventually we lost the patient, but at least she got the treatment. So I think we need to plan. We need to plan and manage this patient appropriately.
Thank you very much, Professor Sani, for your comment. Let's bring it again, Dr. Vivian Kwahe. Dr. Vivian Kwahe, against the background of what the specialists have said, the nephrologist, oncologist, and cardiologist, what has been the experience with the case management of persons who have COVID-19 and comorbidities, particularly of, if you like, the most severe types, either a cancer patient or kidney patient or a patient with heart disease?
Thank you once more. Yes, I want to start by saying that our COVID-19 case management team is made up of 6 consultants, senior consultants. We have 2 infectious disease physicians. We have a pulmonologist. We have a pediatrician. We have an obstetrician, gynecologist, and we have a medical microbiologist. Yes, we have had patients with comorbidities. The first patient we lost, the patient Dr. Bello referred to, who was a patient that had multiple myeloma, a blood cancer, and was undergoing chemotherapy. We invited a hematologist to review the patient from the hospital. So we invited a hematologist that came in and reviewed the patients. We do collaborate with consultants in different fields. We have an ECG machine in our facility in the isolation unit, and we have an ECG technician whom we call to come and do the ECG of our patients that have either hypertension or diabetes. And when we get these reports, we send them electronic copies to the cardiologist. They review, and then we discuss. So we have these discussions with the cardiologist when we are managing a patient that has a cardiac comorbidity. Likewise, for our diabetic patients, we discuss with the endocrinologist. They may not come in physically, put on the PPE to go and see the patients. We already have three physicians on ground in the COVID team. So they don't really need to come in, put on the PPE to go and see the patients, but we discuss with them. Like almost on a daily basis, we discuss with Professor Anoma, who is a professor of endocrinology. She tells us how to titrate the insulin of these patients. You understand? So there is this collaboration between us and the other specialists. The issue of having an ICU in the isolation ward is very, very key. Let me say that for us, our isolation unit has an ICU. We have an ICU in the isolation unit. It is not advisable to manage the severe COVID cases in the normal isolation ward in the hospital because you have other patients that do not have COVID being managed there. So you put those patients at risk, you will put the staff at risk. Ideally, an isolation unit should have an ICU where you manage the severe cases. We call ours the high dependency room, where we have the ventilators and all the monitors, and that is where we manage the severe cases. So I think isolation units should push for an ICU in situ, not taking severe cases to the isolation, to the ICU in the hospital, for reasons I have already explained. Not only do we have an ICU in situ, we also have a lab. We made an appeal to NNPC, and they came and set up a lab for us in our isolation ward, So we don't take samples for electrolytes, urea creatinine, liver function tests, full blood count to the main lab for the same reasons, because we don't want to expose other staff. So we run our investigations in our facility. We also have a radiology unit, again, courtesy of some donors, the Mainstream Energy Solutions. They came and they set up in collaboration with NCDC. NCDC gave us a mobile X-ray machine, and the Mainstream's Energy Solution came up and set up a radiology unit. So we have a radiology unit in our isolation ward where we do our chest X-rays. We don't go to the hospital, to the main radiology unit in the hospital. What we don't have is facilities for dialysis, and we really must begin to make or have this kind of conversation and make arrangements to have a dialysis unit in the isolation center, because these are not patients you will carry and take to the main dialysis unit to go and dialyze. You will be putting every other person at risk, and that is not what we want. So it will be proper, and it is the ideal thing for an isolation unit to have facilities for dialysis. In fact, we were having this conversation yesterday. We have a medical doctor who is hypertensive diabetic with background renal impairment who came in. He's on admission right now, and we are thinking of dialysis. We are thinking of dialysis, and we were asking ourselves, where are we going to dialyze this patient? Where are we going to dialyze this patient? We don't have a dialysis unit in the hospital. Apart from the fact that this patient, this index case, is a known hypertensive diabetic, COVID-19 patients are susceptible to developing acute kidney injury, just like Professor Mahmoud has explained. They come in because of the cytokine storm and the fact that quite a number of them present with diarrhea. They have this profuse large volume diarrhea, which is a risk, of a factor for developing acute kidney injury. So they can come in acute kidney injury, and they may require dialysis. So I think, isolation centers should begin to have this conversation and make such arrangements. Why do we dialyze these patients if eventually they will need dialysis? So by and large, we collaborate with all the specialists, the experts in various fields. The joy we have is that we already have 3 physicians in the team. So it's easier for us to collaborate with the endocrinologist, collaborate with the cardiologist, collaborate with the hematologist when we have cases that we need their expert input.
Very interesting, Dr. Kwahe. Very interesting indeed. What you don't have now is a dialysis facility. You have for others, and it's good to hear from you that you are collaborating with other medical personnel who specialize in the different aspects of medical service. Thank you. At this point, we are going to take a short break. When we get back, the conversation continues. Also, we have, of course, input from Nigerians who are reacting via Skype. Rather via tweet, and we're going to let you know what they're saying. Stay with us.
Nigerians, coronavirus is dangerous. It can kill. When you see this sign, high fever, cough, shortness of breath, drowsiness, pneumonia, don't panic, don't hide. Don't embark in self-medication. Promptly visit the nearest medical facility. Report all cases to the nearest hospital. Prevention is key. Avoid contact with infected persons. Avoid crowded areas as much as possible. Wash your hands regularly. Use hand sanitizers. Your life is precious. Stay alive. Live long, live right. This message is sponsored by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture and the Nigerian Film Corporation. Nigerian Film Corporation, powering possibility.
As a strong immune system increases the chances of victims surviving COVID-19, a corruption-free society creates opportunities for citizens to thrive and prosper. Build your immunity. Stop corruption now. Report all acts of corruption to ICPC on this toll-free number 0800 22 55 4272. This message is brought to you by ICPC and NTA.
Wetin be this coronavirus thing? Na true?
You see this coronavirus wey be COVID-19. Na the whole world palava, and e don dey kill many people for China, Italy, UK, US, Spain, and even for other countries dem.
Okay, wetin come be the reason wey dem say make everybody tanda for house?
Na because if e dey waka pium go carry am from person wey don get am, you go carry come give your family dem. Na so the thing take dey kill other people for other countries.
Okay, wetin come be that social distancing sef?
You see social distance. Now make we no come close because this thing now from air and touch now we dey contact am. We suppose dey at least 6 foot away from each other every time.
So okay, no be only to wash your hand and to sanitize them alone.
Make we no take this washing of hand thing take play but make we come together, join hand as we take pursue Ebola, pursue this coronavirus. Make we be each other keepers now.
All right, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We have some tweets that have come in from our viewers. We'll quickly go through those tweets now and then return to our guests. Festus Akimboyewa tweets, people with underlying ailments must rigorously follow the recommended shielding measures, such as not leaving their homes and minimizing all non-essential contact with other members of their household.
All right, Akeji Olabaju, it is true that the virus is weak and it looks for underlying ailments to prey on. It points to the fact that clinical care and management of such ailments will significantly reduce death and lower our case fatality ratio well below global average.
Cecilia Okoroma, what COVID-19 has done to sufferers of high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma, etc., which are termed underlying ailments, is to make them extra careful by avoiding issues that will worsen the problem and expose them to early death.
All right, Law Alpha C. One can authoritatively say that underlying health complications are the major reasons why COVID-19 has taken the toll on the aged persons of the society and making the chances of survival very slim.
Innocent Yawa James. Now, because of underlying issues, Nigerians are no longer going to the hospital due to the fear of being tagged COVID-19 patients. There is a fear that every health issue is now associated with COVID-19.
Yes, Mike Anyako is actually educating us on symptoms associated with COVID-19, of course, which the medical personnel have told Nigerians a long time ago. Said COVID-19 associated with a constant fever, shortness of breath, change of skin, coughing, etc.
Chris Simeon says, in our society today, people who die a natural death are seen as COVID-19 casualties. However, death after COVID-19 will be attributed to what? Individual's immune system plays a major role in the treatment prevention of COVID-19.
Or more, perhaps. There is this innuendo going around about all deaths now linked to COVID-19. People complain that deaths at hospital beds these days are seen as COVID-19 induced, where there are clear cases of different ailments. Who is profiting from the pandemic? People should fear God.
Well, those last two tweets, will be the basis of the question to Professor Bello Abubakar and indeed the other guest. What exactly, should we assume or identify as the cause of death? Let's take the first fatality arising from COVID-19 here in Abuja. It was a cancer patient, and unfortunately, he succumbed. But he was then classified as a COVID-19 patient. So is it that other diseases don't kill these days? It's only COVID-19 that kills? And so that, just for clarification, and so we know precisely what to do. If you are attacking or if you are treating COVID-19 and then you leave the comorbidities, does it mean that those comorbidities will not resurge and then take the life of the patient?
So that's a very interesting question. we run clinics up till today, so we see other patients in different departments and units. So those that don't have COVID-19 infection don't go to the COVID-19 clinics or isolation centers, as it were. Knowing the cause of death really require, in most instances, an autopsy. And we don't really do a lot of autopsies for all the patients that die, except, of course, if there is a homicide and all that and all that. Now, the understanding, you see, Nigerians, consistently have been in denial of this particular pandemic. We feel it is not our own, it's not even here. People are dying because of hunger, because of poverty, and so on and so forth. And of course, people will die of other diseases. But when you have an existing COVID-19 infection, which will worsen the clinical state that you've been, so the cost is most likely to be the COVID-19 infection. Like the Dr. Ukwaige said, there are so many things that actually developed as a result of the infection, even though you have an underlying ailment. Somebody that has, hypertension, diabetes, now is having acute renal injury that will probably kill him or kill her. So those are the real thing. The fact that you developed a COVID infection makes your condition worse and probably is the real reason why that patient will die. If it was only probably the cancer that the patient has, the chances is that he will continue to treat his cancer and probably he will die after many, many years of treatment and so on and so forth. But the moment he develops COVID-19 infection, then it cascades into so many things that will ultimately cause multiple organ failure and the patient will die.
So that will be like a proximate cause of death.
So that may be the primary cause. And then the secondary cause may be those underlying illnesses. So that is the way it is.
Invariably, from what you have explained, it is COVID-19 that killed the person. I mean, ordinary Nigerian will see that. No. What I'm saying,
you are talking like a pathologist.
No, we want Nigerians to understand this. Because one,
I'd like to say.
I know he's going to come. He explained that. Look, you have an underlying ailment. Quite all right. It could be managed for 10 years, right? Then COVID-19 now sets in, and it escalates what you had before, and you die.
Exactly. So that is why we are so frightened about the COVID-19 thing. Because if there was no COVID-19 infection, probably you will continue to manage your chronic illness.
Exactly. So let's bring it to Dr. Latish.
Well, it's a very interesting one because all over the world, even doctors are beginning to worry about how and what to fill in death certificates all over the world. Because it now seems that everyone is dying from COVID. So the Nigerians are right to think that. So we should also differentiate between dying from COVID and dying with COVID. If you have an underlying condition, you're going to die with COVID disease. Mm-hmm. So there's something else underneath, and then you're dying with COVID-19 infection. So
what are you dying from it now?
Well, those ones that very few people that you really not find anything, they don't have underlying condition. You can't find anything, and then it's just COVID-19 infection or COVID-19, as a disease, as you can see.
Well, Dr. Latish,
there is a difference between these two.
Okay, thanks. I just want to go back to Professor Sani in Kano. Professor Sani, tell us, for persons who have underlying conditions, what should therefore be a patient's own responsibility in these times of the pandemic?
Well, thank you very much for this very important question. I think that is what we should be preaching. One, patients with underlying conditions, as mentioned times over and over, they should actually practice those recommendations of staying at home, not mingling with people, washing their hands, and then I try as much as possible to make sure they take their medications and they reach out to their doctors when they feel anything abnormal. One thing that we need to educate is to try to remove that fear of getting infected when they go to the hospital, because the hospitals ideally should have triage areas where patients will be triaged to go to where the non-COVID patients are seen, and if they are high-risk patients, they are referred to where COVID patients are seen. So they should practice all those hygienes, the hygiene, the social distancing, the putting of masks, the not mingling with people, not coming out of their houses, and taking their medication, because chronic illness means that they have medication, either antihypertensives or anti-diabetics, or they are taking some medication for the chronic illness. So they should make sure they adhere to their drugs. They shouldn't stop, because there are a lot of myths now around COVID-19, and some drugs, information has been going around that people who take certain kind of drugs should stop them, because those drugs predispose to increased chance of having the infection, which has not been proven. So they should take their drugs. And then when they feel any abnormality, they should call their doctors and then try and see them. And then on the side of the system, I think that the system needs to be established in a way that there should be no fear of coming to the hospital in case of emergencies. For the patients who need to come, especially if they are chronic illnesses and they are seen and taken care of. And not all patients that present with symptoms of breathlessness and cough are COVID-19. Of course, we know of the overlap between the symptomatology of respiratory illnesses, cardiac illnesses, and COVID-19. But systems should have checklists that will go through and classify patients into high risk or low risk. And all low risk patients who have underlying illnesses should be taken care of without being labeled as having COVID. Even though I know that there should be adequate education, but also the healthcare workers should protect themselves so that they don't get infected and transmit the infection to their colleagues or to other patients.
All right, let's return to Abuja. If I say Gwagwalada precisely, where we have Dr. Kwahe. Dr. Kwahe, look, you are in the battlefield of this medical war. Therefore, you've seen a lot right from the beginning. Now, when a patient comes in with COVID-19 and has underlying ailment, you see, it appears to be a complex situation. Now, you've told us that you collaborate with other medical personnel or doctors, who specialize in different areas. They don't have to come to the area, but then you have conversations with them and perhaps carry out their instructions. Does that really work? Is it not necessary to have such medical personnel when a patient has underlying ailment?
It works for us. It has been working. If a patient has an underlying ailment, we discuss with the specialist in that area, and it has been working. Like I mentioned earlier on, we primarily in the team we have 3 physicians. Physicians are trained to manage most of these chronic underlying diseases that we're talking about. We have the basic knowledge to manage some of these chronic diseases. Of course, we need the expertise of the experts in those areas, and collaborating with them either through phone calls, they review the results that we have on ground. It has been working for us, and it is enough for us. We don't need them to come physically in, but if they want to come in, fine. Just like Professor Mahmoud mentioned earlier on, many specialists don't want to come into the isolation ward. The risk is palpable. This is a very, very infectious pathogen. So it's good to limit the number of people that are going into the isolation ward. If it is something I can have a phone conversation with a cardiologist, why will I insist he come in and put himself at risk? So for us, it has been working, and it has been working fine. But that does not mean that if the specialist needs to come in, they cannot come in. They can always come in. Just a comment on the issue of COVID-19 deaths and underlying comorbidities. I want to say that COVID-19, I will want to call it the accelerator of death in these patients with comorbidities. Okay, like Dr. Bello mentioned earlier on, a patient has cancer, the patient is managing his cancer. Maybe the two-year survival is about 10%, 5-year survival is about maybe 1% or whatever. And then the patient now gets COVID-19 and the patient dies in 3 days. Death, of course, number one is COVID-19. COVID-19 has accelerated the death in this patient. Number two, death, of course, I will now put the particular malignancy. For the patients we have lost, I'm the one that has filled in the death certificate. So I put COVID-19 as number one cause of death because truly it's COVID-19 that has precipitated the death in that particular patient, irrespective of the fact that they had comorbidity. A patient with diabetes maybe has 10 years to live, and the patient develops COVID-19 and dies in 3 days. Cause of death is COVID-19. It's not diabetes. It may be diabetes, but I'm saying in this particular case, the cause of death is COVID-19. Patient didn't have a hyperglycemic emergency. Patient came in maybe with normal blood sugar or moderately elevated blood sugar with COVID-19 infection, and the patient dies. It is not the diabetes that killed the patient, it's COVID-19 that accelerated the death in this patient. This patient maybe might have lived for another 10, 15, or even 20 years if they manage their diabetes, properly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vivian Kware, for your explanation. Now back to the studios here, Dr. Bello and Dr. Olatishe. Part of what we have seen, not just in Nigeria, but mostly elsewhere around the world, on account of the surge in the number of COVID-19 patients, hospital bed spaces are limited, professionals are also engaged, and then so you have limited number of persons to attend to patients who are coming in. For patients who have underlying ailments, again, what should be their own responsibility in safeguarding themselves against contracting COVID-19 in the first instance? And assuming they did, what are the options open to them?
So Professor Mahmoud has already alluded to that they should maintain all the necessary things like distancing, wearing masks when they are going out, reducing the number of interactions that they have, washing their hands frequently, and so on and so forth. Beyond that, I think they should also try as much as possible to liaise with their clinicians to see how many times do they really need to go to hospitals, and also how many times, their medications and so on. In some countries, what they do now is basically telemedicine. The patient is actually on phone all the time trying to talk to the doctor if they need to change their medications or they need to have a new prescription, and so on and so forth. What we do in oncology is we've developed some templates, some protocol on how to actually manage patients. This is global, and we also have for sub-Saharan Africa. If a patient is supposed to have 30 sessions of radiotherapy, you now reduce it probably to 5 and increase the dose, what is called hypofractionation, and so on and so forth. So we reduce the number of stay of the patient in the hospitals. That way you are reducing their chances of exposure, because we do know that not only in the outside, in the community, but you could actually have a hospital-acquired infections, and that's why you have a lot of the health workers getting infected. The other thing is that the moment they realize that there is something going on, they should contact their primary physician, who will make contact with the right people to make sure that they are isolated and they are treated accordingly. Lastly, the healthcare workers also have certain responsibilities to their patients. they must also protect the patients, because we know that healthcare workers are getting infected. They can infect their patients. So it is their responsibility. Healthcare workers must make it a point that they are also protecting themselves by wearing proper masks, by sanitizing all the time, by changing the gloves that they use, and so on and so forth, and even wearing PPEs. These are not readily available at this point in time. But we hope that government will be more proactive and provide all those things to stem the infections of healthcare workers as well.
All right, we ran out of time, the legislation, so we would have asked you to come in here, but of course we don't have time to continue this conversation. So at this point, we'd like to appreciate all of you for sharing your time and, of course, your insight that has made this particular edition very interesting. First, Dr. Bello Abubakar, President, African Organization for Research and Training in Cancer. He's also the head clinical oncology and radiotherapy, National Hospital, Abuja. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Oleleko Olatishe, consultant nephrologist and transplant physician, Zenith Medical and Kidney Center, Abuja. It's been a pleasure. From Kano, Professor Mahmoud Omar Sani has been part of this program. Professor Sani is a cardiologist. We thank you for your insights. Thank you indeed. And Vaska from Gwagwalada, that's a lady you cannot see and touch because she spends most of her time at the isolation center. I would like to appreciate your efforts and thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts with us this morning. Thank you, Dr. Vivian Kwahe, Head Infectious Disease Unit, University of Nigeria, Abuja Teaching Hospital, Gwagwalada. Thank you indeed for coming. Well, next is sports.
Justin Gaethje produced the best performance of his career to finish Tony Ferguson and win the UFC interim lightweight title at UFC 249. The event was held behind closed doors in Jacksonville, Florida, after the global coronavirus pandemic forced several changes to the card and venue. Undisputed champion Khabib Nurmagomedov was originally set to face Ferguson on 18th April in Brooklyn, but the coronavirus outbreak forced the event to be moved, and the UFC's attempt to hold the show on tribal land in